So, welcome everyone. Welcome to this first cluster talk since the summer break. Hope you had a great break. My name is Chris Burns, and I'll be with you during this session. We're talking about cluster development, we're talking about funding, and very important at the beginning of this in September as we come back from the break to see how your clusters are going, working. These cluster talks are here to compare notes, to build networks, to find out how they can work and how they work better. And they're organized by the European Cluster Collaboration Platform, the ECCP, encompassing more than 1,500 organizations, and this is on behalf of DG Grow at the European Commission. Let's take a look at the agenda first of all. First, the cluster news. We're going to get some news on what cluster activities there are. Then we'll get a presentation from the European Commission. We'll have Slido questions out to you, tapping your brains after that presentation, and then a panel discussion and you involved in Q&A. And then we'll hear some funding opportunities. Now, tech tips. How do you participate? Well, you can put your questions in the Slido. Sorry, you can after the Slido polls, you can put your questions in the Q&A. You look at the the button at the bottom of your screen, which is for Q&A, and there's also a chat. Good idea to keep an eye on the chat because there's a lot of great give and take on that. It's important that this is a two-way street with you, with the European Commission, getting your information and feedback as well. And this is recorded for playback. Slides will be available on the ECCP website after the session. And keep in mind, hashtag EU Clusters Talks. Hashtag EU Clusters Talks. You can see that at the bottom left of your screen if there is anything you'd like to cast wider from this discussion. Now, let's get to news from the European Cluster Collaboration Platform with Angela Negrete, team member of the European Cluster Collaboration Platform. Angela.
Good morning, Chris. Good morning, everybody. Very happy to be here this morning and share some news from our ECCP collaboration platform. First, we want to, invite you to join the workshop that we are preparing. This is the C2 Lab, which is taking place 25 and 26 September in Strasbourg. This is in collaboration with the French Association of Pôle de Competitivité, and it is a workshop style event where you can have the opportunity to meet new partners, discuss your project ideas, and initiate collaboration. For example, you can apply to an European goal. You can either join with a concrete project proposal or offer your expertise and knowledge by joining others.
And the weather should be really, really great in Strasbourg at that time. And the wine barges along the canals, you can't miss that. It's wonderful.
That's important too, for sure. Okay, if you're more into your skill, being a cluster manager, you can apply for our next Cluster Booster Academy. It will involve up to 50 participants, and it will run for 5 days in a hybrid format, including individual coaching sessions. And we have 3 days online training sessions, and then 2 days of in-person training, 3/4 March at the Warsaw University of Technology. The deadline for your application is 17th October, and you will see that this opportunity will provide you learning opportunities to further develop your skills. You can also meet the needs of European cluster management teams in their daily work. It offers clusters manager teams a chance to learn from each other's experience, and it provides the opportunity to co-shape new European value chains, amongst others. Also, we want you also to save the date for the upcoming clusters mid-regions. We have these two opportunities in October in Moldova and in Spain, and another two in Germany and Belgium. And this is to join these transnational events that bring together clusters and policymakers at the local, regional, and national levels with the aim to strengthening the industrial ecosystem in a selected host region, this fourth that I have said. And this event facilitates the implementation of good practices where clusters play an active role in regional economies and are drivers for economy transition, and to create and promote collaboration between clusters and regional stakeholders. And also, we want you to know that we have the opportunity to apply for the EU-India matchmaking. This is an delegation from the European Union of Clusters and SMEs that will who will travel to Bengaluru for this matchmaking event to be held 19 and 21st November. This event has the focus areas in biotech, digital, green tech, and advanced manufacturing, and it brings together cluster organization and SMEs from all the European Union, non-European Union countries participating in the single market program Cosmos Strand and India, and it will provide participants an excellent chance to promote cluster to cluster, cluster to business, and business to business collaborations. Thank you.
Okay, that's thank you very much. Muchas gracias, Angela. And
Encantada.
we'll come back to you later with the financing funding opportunities, right?
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you.
Okay, see you in a bit. Let's go on to Jan Philipp Kramer, or Kramer, I guess you say, anglicized, head of EU Services Prognos, team member of the European Cluster Collaboration Platform, will help us navigate this idea that most of the EU 27 have specific cluster policies to support innovation, research and development, but how do you finance? It's typically a mix of different things: public, private, grants, subsidies, tax incentives. Jan Philipp, I am bewildered. Help me.
Yes, good morning. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. And I guess I have to take over with the screen sharing from now
Okay.
on. So I hope you can all see the presentation coming now. One moment, here you go. So indeed, yeah, it's a great pleasure to be back. And as you kindly introduced, I also thought we do some memorizing of key figures around cluster support, but also the cluster ecosystem overall in the European Union and beyond. And therefore, I'm very happy to share with you some of the insights of the European Cluster Panorama 2024. Those of you who were at the European Cluster Conference in Brussels in May have seen a preview of some of the results already. And this report is out now for a few weeks. So if you haven't checked it out, I will be providing the QR code in my presentation so you can see the whole report published on the European Cluster Collaboration Platform website. So I'll be talking about not all of these details, obviously, but what you will find in the report is a really in-depth overview of the European cluster landscape. So all of the details that you may need to know in discussions with policymakers, or if you are a policymaker, to check out what our view is and also the comparison to others. We talked very much about clusters as drivers of competitiveness and transformation, and also of the relevance of cluster policies and supporting clusters and the environment to basically come to these effects. And obviously, we have some thoughts on how to go on in the future with conclusions and implications. So let's dive right in. And this picture is really my most favorite one because it shows really in one slide the comprehensive landscape that has been formed in a way over the past 20 years, looking back on cluster-based policymaking. And Chris already gave us one of the figures: 1,500 cluster organizations on the ECCP, of which 1,200 are actually European cluster organizations, comprising roughly 7,000 to 10,000 people working in clusters. So
Jan Philipp, can I jump in real quick? Can you
of course
click on the slideshow symbol at the bottom right so we see just the slide instead of the rest of the screen? Are you able to do that?
Let me see.
Okay.
Is it better that way?
No, you need to that symbol at the bottom right of that screen, you need to click slideshow. So you just see the slides. You don't see the
The
rest of the
preview.
screen, the preview. Yeah. Are you able to do that?
Apologies for that. No,
All right.
I don't see that. I don't have this option here on my
Okay.
screen.
Well, unless maybe the
Is it better this way?
techies can handle that. But I mean, we see it. As long as you're advancing, there we go. Okay, we'll go to the next one. But if somebody could click on slideshow, then it'll be a bigger slide.
It shows slideshow for me now.
Curious. Okay, let's proceed.
Okay, as long as you can see the slide, that's if that's the case, we're good. So just let's start there again. 1,500, 1,200 from the EU, around 10,000 cluster professionals. And what we see clearly is that obviously there has been, as I said, 20 years of cluster-based policy making, but there has also been a dynamic since 2014 because 40% of those cluster organizations have been established since then. So that's around 480 that have been established, 50 since 2021. So it's quite comprehensive cluster landscape that we have. And this is also resembled in the number of cluster members, 170,000 cluster members represented by those cluster organizations. And many of them obviously small and medium-sized enterprises, but also a significant number, 10% of those are large enterprises, and then we have research organizations. And very importantly, in addition, is that not only we have those individual cluster organizations within regions, but we also have these pan-European meta clusters and, very importantly, national cluster organizations that bring together also policymakers and the different cluster entities within the geography. Now, I want to speak about the funding and the support services, as this is also very essential for the discussion today.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope you can see the slide now. Chris, you can just give me a heads up here.
Okay.
Do you see the support services?
It's not advancing. I'm still seeing the 1,500. Are you maybe sharing the wrong screen? Maybe that's the problem. Need to share the screen that is the slideshow.
Try this again.
Okay. I'm seeing the same thing again. Same thing again.
Yeah, I will progress from here. Is it showing now?
It's not advancing.
Okay, that's really a technical hiccup here. I don't know why this is happening. Apologies.
Ah, okay.
Okay, it may not be progressing this way. Apologies, really.
Voilà.
Okay, so you can see the support services that are provided by the European cluster organizations. And at the very top, funding opportunities come out with 62% of those services that are provided. And we've covered over 150 different services here. And that's, I think, a clear sign. And it doesn't mean that it necessarily resembles cluster organizations looking for funding opportunities, but rather that cluster organizations look for funding opportunities for their members in order to advance their innovation performance, to advance the building of value chains, to foster internationalization. So funding opportunities, collaboration as a second key pillar, and skilling, so the whole topic around human capital are really essential. And the examples that I'm just showing on the right side give you this glimpse of what types of projects may be behind that. I will not go into the details here, just also to make up some time that has been lost now through the technical hiccups. But you can see that the support include a number of activities that promote innovation, investments, and other aspects, and they're all related to those support services of clusters. If we now move to the impact, I hope you can see it now. Do you see the impact
Yep.
slide?
It's
Okay,
advancing.
great.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
good.
then the problem has been resolved.
Mhm.
So it's not just about the services. We are also interested in the macroeconomic and the regional economic impacts, obviously. And we talk not a lot about competitive at this time of the policy cycle. And the evidence that we have collected very robustly over a longer period of time is wherever you have a strong cluster presence, you also will see that the key competitiveness indicators are showing positively. And we see that in business environment, firm behavior, innovation potential, and last but not least, also in the economic returns. So just a few of those indicators to give a bit more word to what I just said.
Yeah,
Business
because I mean,
environment.
what you
Yes,
showed earlier, that circular graph was that funding's important. It's the most important, but it's not the only thing. There's a lot of expertise, support that these clusters provide
indeed, indeed. And that really translates into these indicators.
into the competitiveness. Yeah, that's right.
Indeed. So we see the birth of enterprises, so new startups coming. That's very much important for the business environment. Where we have clusters, we have a stronger positive correlation to that. Mostly also when it comes to the firm behavior, and I just talked about the project development where clusters play a key role for SMEs in particular, business R&D investments are going up where we have strong clusters. And now just going to the economic returns, higher GDP per capita, higher productivity, better employment rate, and also employment in key technology and knowledge industries. So all of this really resembles what the cluster concept promises, but it also holds true on the economic data that we collected for the EU. Now, I've taken just a more simple illustration of this story. And you see here our cluster map on the right-hand side, and you see the regional innovation scoreboard on the left-hand side. And just pick 3 regions. We will have a colleague from Catalonia speaking later.
That's
You
right.
see Catalonia, extremely strong cluster ecosystem. A lot of cluster organizations present on the right-hand side. And you can see that Catalonia makes up more than 30% of the patents in Spain. So another indication of the story I just showed you.
Of innovation, yeah.
Baden-Württemberg in Bavaria, strong cluster policies and long-term cluster development. Those states make up 40 or more than 40 billion of R&D investments in Germany in 21 alone. So another picture of this story. And last but not least, Finland, and I know colleagues in Finland just maybe have finished their cluster conference, ranks 6 among over 130 economies in the Global Innovation Index, and also has developed a nice cluster ecosystem. So just a few stories to make a bit more ground to these figures. Now, quickly to our key topics all over, right? Digital and green transition. We looked very specifically into this topic. So what is the relationship between digital readiness and green readiness and cluster presence? So same type of analysis, presence of clusters, and those indicators. And what can we see? Digital readiness is strongly supported by cluster presence through different services around digital transformation. And that is resembled again by a number of key indicators, such as the amount of employed ICT specialists, highly correlated with cluster presence, digital patents, and also the share of ICT in gross value added in the territory. And on the green side, little less progress maybe to this point in time, but we see still clusters make an impact. We have more people employed in green jobs, so green specialists. We have more circular economy facilities. The only downside, and that's why it's also shown in red here, we do have higher air emissions in industry where we have strong cluster presence, which is basically showing that there is an industrial agglomeration in more energy and resource intensive industries. And the ECCP, to that note, has also put up a green transition support service in order to help clusters advance the green and digital transition.
Yeah, a work in progress.
Work in progress. All right. Last data slide. I think we all know that the investment landscape in the EU at the moment has some challenges. So companies tend to invest less But what is very promising is that we do see still a relevant amount of investments coming from outside. And we've just shown 3 examples for foreign direct investment and how that's relating also to cluster presence. So we have Aragon and North Rhine-Westphalia, so Spain and Germany, both attracting significant amounts for AI data centers. It's more than 6 billion in Aragon and more than 3 billion in North Rhine-Westphalia. Why do they go there? Of course, infrastructure, skilled labor, but also both regions have strong digital and quantum technology clusters that attract those investments. Yeah. Similar story in Poland, semiconductor industry investment coming in, also acknowledging this fact. And last example, Rhineland-Palatinate absorbing more than 2 billion in high-tech pharmaceutical production side from a US company. And the CEO stated in the news report around it, we come here because it's a strong existing biotech cluster and we want to be part of it. So it all shows you clusters matter. Yeah. Okay, let's come to the policy side. This is just providing you an overview. We have analyzed all European countries with regards to their cluster policy. And we wanted to find out how cluster policies are designed, how they are focusing, are they dedicated cluster policies, or are clusters supported more in, let's say, broader policy spectrums such as industrial policies or similar. What we see is that obviously there is not a homogeneous pattern all over the EU. There's somehow evolution of things, obviously also related to when did countries join the European Union and what is their policy philosophy overall as well. What we do see that we have 14 member states where we say they have really followed a very dedicated cluster policy. They're mostly in Central and Southern Europe. You see them painted here in this blue color, dedicated cluster policy. And what is, I think, good news, they basically comprise also the lion's share, so 71% of all cluster organizations that are registered on the ECCP, which shows they are operating in a cluster policy environment, which is promoting and also supporting the development of clusters. Special case, we will hear from Belgium later, cluster policy in all regions. So this is maybe something to deep dive later. And then we have countries with broader sectoral policies, many of those in Northern Europe, but also in Southeast Europe. But there we see also progress. I mentioned Finland. We have Ireland and Hungary, for instance. They're all going for more dedicated cluster policies right now, understanding, I hope also based on all the discussions that we have here in the cluster talks, that this is a very good investment to make, and it may also lead to good returns. I will be a bit quicker on the examples just to make up room for the debate that is coming, but I wanted to give 2 different examples for cluster policy support, one from a more dedicated cluster policy and one from a more broader approach. The one is, the dedicated one is coming from Baden-Württemberg. I mentioned earlier, Baden-Württemberg has a long legacy in cluster policy, started very early. And the key message I wanted to give here is they have developed cluster policy along with its cluster landscape and the needs that were changing over the course of time. And this evolutionary perspective is, I think, quite helpful because you can't start just a cluster policy from scratch and go all in. So what they did is they started early to understand what is our cluster landscape, what are existing cluster initiatives, and that all started around 2008. Then they looked into, okay, what can we do to professionalize cluster management? And there was, of course, a lot of work also coming from the European level. And now they moved into foresight capabilities to advance also the development, the economic development through cluster policy. And how did they do that? They set up a cluster agency. It's now called the Regio Cluster Agency, in order to integrate the policy approaches and regional development and to support the cluster organizations in their operations. They do not provide general funding to cluster organizations, but they have to service through the cluster agency as a knowledge provider and service provider. funding is organized through different vehicles, mostly the ERDF, so the European Regional Development Fund, and different channels. And the funding mix, as we talk about this, varying from national, European, regional agencies, membership fees, fee-based services, and also participation in projects. Now let's move east to Poland. Here we have the regional example from Malopolska. And I think it's important to contextualize. It's a regional support, and we classified it as a more broad support because clusters play a key role in the regional innovation strategy. But it also connects to the national level, the so-called National Key Clusters Program, which is supporting basically a high quality access of clusters in Poland, but not providing specific funding, but rather making those national key clusters eligible. So what we do see is that in Poland, we have a great heterogeneity in terms of cluster budgets that come at the national and the regional level. Once you have this label on the national level, you have a high budget and high resources to develop. If you have a more regional approach, we do see that those clusters do not receive as much support as we see elsewhere. And this is, of course, also very interesting in terms of what those cluster organizations are then capable to do. So wrapping up very quickly, the start was a bit bumpy on the technology, but I hope these key figures are still there for you to understand that these cluster organizations in the EU 2027 span the whole continent. They're key integrators to integrate the economy, innovation networks, and so on. And therefore, they are also relevant for all industrial ecosystems in the EU. The organizations actively support competitiveness and also the transition. We've seen that in all of these macro indicators that I've shown you, and I think this is a very strong sign also to keep going and strongly on the cluster concept. And last but not least, we also find that those dedicated funding streams and support services help cluster organizations. They help them in order to tap into other funding opportunities and also enable a more sustainable financial basis for their operations, but then also making sure that this impact is basically spread to all of their members in order to ensure that these effects that I've shown on the macroeconomic side are ensured over longer term, basically make them sustainable. So if you want to find more about the report, here is the QR. And as we will share all these slides, you can also look into that and get them directly from there. Thank you very much.
That's great, Jan Philip. Thank you so much. Already have questions coming in, and please send them in. We'll get to them as soon as we can. Before we get to the panel, let's go to the Slido questions after what you've just heard from Jan Philip. Let's ask you three Slido questions. That's how you can connect on Slido. #funding clusters. That's how you log in on Slido. And here we go. Which type of financial support is most effective for cluster development in your experience? The most important, the most effective. It's probably a mix, but what is the key one for you? And let's see how that develops. Right. 50. I can't see what's above what's 61. Grants. Grants. Okay, good. Thank you. Grants, mainly grants, public-private. Okay. Interesting. There's no, hey, Jan Philip, are you there?
Of course.
Yeah. I see 0 on tax incentives. That's, I guess, the most important is having some kind of grant to get going, right? Does this surprise you at all, the results?
No, it doesn't really surprise me. I think most of those measures that we are looking at are grant-based. And as we're talking about innovation a lot, and also to some extent, we want to go to a certain direction with what we're doing. So grants are a really good option. But of course, we see that tax incentives, which are more broadly operating, can be of interest for R&D
Right.
measures, right?
So it's part of it. It's part of the mix, but it's definitely not the overriding way to finance or to get a company started.
Indeed, yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's go to the second question. And this is, how are clusters helping your organization get funding? How are clusters helping you to get that money? So this is a word cloud. You can put in whatever you want. And after what you heard from Jan Philip, maybe that gives you an idea as well of how you could partnership, cascade funding. Cascade fund. Jan Philip, can you explain that cascade funding principle again?
Oh, difficult questions. No, not difficult. Cascade funding is basically, first of all, a very popular concept in the cluster world. It means that you get a project agreed that covers a certain thematic area, let's say digital. And within this project, you have a budget that you can basically hand out to SMEs, mostly smaller scale budgets, but you don't have to make a big competition afterwards. So let's say you have this project going, and you have SMEs that want to implement a certain piloting or testing of a technology. You can make this funding available to them directly as a cluster organization.
Thus the cascade idea.
Indeed.
Okay. Great. So that seems to be very very key. And then cooperation, also cooperation. Matchmaking, yeah, sure. Partnership. A lot of good elements there. That shows how much clusters are helping.
Indeed, Chris, if I may, cooperation sounds so simple, right? And it often is mentioned, but I think we should not underestimate its importance, because we have a large European market. We have different competencies spread across the continent, and matching the right organizations with each other is a really great value where clusters play a key role. And I think, therefore, cooperation should not just be mentioned and, oh yeah, we all have this, we all meet and talk. It's really important.
You have that network, that infrastructure, that support, that you're not alone, right? You can connect. Okay, let's go to question 3. How can EU member states improve the alignment of national cluster policies with broader EU policies? How can the member states improve on those cluster policies? That's kind of sounding you out. The role of the EU member countries. How can they help to improve? Okay, metacluster, that's a good one. Yep, on the national level, okay, to support those. Yeah, we see that quite a few countries don't have that, right? Cross-border initiatives, right? Bring in regional perspective, long-term commitment, national co-financing, right? Well, let's talk about all this. Intercluster cooperation, yeah, that's important too, that the member states help that. Superclusters, targeted funding. Wow, lots of ideas. This is great. That's great. Okay, let us then move on to the panel. And let's begin. If all the panelists can turn on your cameras so we can see you. And I'd like to just begin with a lightning round. Everybody tell me in a sort of elevator pitch what you do. Anna Monjo, a team member of the Catalunya Clusters Program, Axio. You're calling in near Barcelona?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good morning,
so
Chris.
What do you do? Morning.
Yeah, we do quite a lot of things. You have seen in Jean-Philippe's presentation that we have been running our cluster policy for more than 30 years, and that's why we have these results, and that's why we have this positioning inside Europe and a cluster policy level. And here in Catalonia, we do have the Catalan Cluster Program that currently has 27 clusters inside it. This cluster have 2,900 members in total.
Wow,
These are unique members, so some of these members are part of more than one cluster. And the aggregate turnover of these members is more than 80,000 million euros, which represents more than the 30% of the industrial turnover here in Catalonia. Wow. And these are the big numbers, but the important thing for us is that they generate every year more than 100 collaborative projects, which at the end is the aim of, is the objective of having these clusters in our region. And from our side, we help them in different ways. So we have grants. We don't have any tax things, so we are okay in this. But we have grants that help them to develop these projects that they have created from from our clusters, and also we help them in developing their day-by-day activities, because they need to have these base activities such as workshops or working groups or webinars and seminaries to try to detect these projects that they have to foster in the future. So they need to have this day-by-day basis activity in which we also help them. And these are the direct grants we have to help them, but also we have non-direct help for them. So we also have monitoring, evaluation. We also help them to get some funds from the European Union. We have some team dedicated only to help clusters to accede to the European Union helps, and also lots of capacity building. But at the end, we need to collaborate in the public and private way.
Okay, great, thank you. We'll come back to you with some specific examples. Let's go to Annie Renders, Head of Unit Cluster Policy and Strategic Relations, Government of Flanders. This is an outfit called Vlaio, right? I just see that your background is former Flemish Innovation Network, and you used to work at Solvay too. So that's interesting that you know how big companies work, and you're bringing that expertise to smaller startups, right?
Yeah. Well, I work for Vlaio, which is the Agency for Innovation and Entrepreneurship in Flanders, in Belgium. I'm head of unit cluster policy. We have had a cluster policy named cluster policy since 8 years, but we have been working with innovation hubs before and innovation ecosystems, which were all kind of cluster type organizations. So we do have a long history in this cluster policy. We currently fund only the large scale with a big ambition, which we call our spearhead clusters. We have currently 6 spearhead clusters on food, on energy, on chemistry, on logistics. So these are big industry fields for Flanders, important fields for Flanders. So those we fund. We fund the cluster organizations mainly because we still need them to initiate these collaboration projects, the cooperation, as was already shown in the slide, which is very important, is to connect the right partners, the partners from the industry, the partners from the knowledge institutes, the partners from intermediary organizations, so to connect them. That's the big part of the activities from the cluster organizations. And we also have funding for those projects. So it's not just you make the project and then you look for the funding. We have within our fund of innovation and entrepreneurship in Flanders, we have earmarked budget for the cluster projects. And for example, last year, they started 55 projects for over 70 million euros. So it's an important part of the innovation budget in Flanders is going to the companies and the research institutes through these collaboration projects initiated by the cluster organizations.
Okay, great, great. Thank you, Annie. Thank you. Well, let's
Yeah.
move to Michael Liebminger, Cluster Manager, Styrian Business Development Agency, SFG. You also have 6 clusters. I notice you also do online events on zero carbon management, and you do skill up classes in internationalizing, also very key.
Yes, we do. So thank you first of
And,
all for.
and this is you're in Austria, right?
Yes, I'm in Austria, in
Okay.
Styria, Austria.
Yep.
So first of all, thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to speak here. So as you said, we have 6 cluster organizations. We also have a pretty long history in cluster policy. So our first cluster organization was founded 30 years ago. So we have 30 years anniversary next year. It was one of the first all over Europe. It was the AC Stereo Mobility Cluster. And as you can see, it's very important for our policy. We really believe in a strong PPP model, private-public partnership with our cluster organization. So we have a very strong involvement from the government side, which I'm basically managing or coordinating for the cluster organizations. But we also make sure that we have strong industry in our cluster organization. And this combination is very important for us. It's, so to say, our Styrian DNA in cluster work. We heard it before, cooperation. That's the main thing in cluster organizations, of course, but also the EU side, EU funding schemes, cascade funding are getting more and more important for us. And maybe we can elaborate on these things later on in the discussion.
Yes, let's do that. Let's do that. Thank you, Michael. Let's go to Jiří Hedinek, president of the Czech National Cluster Association. You're calling in from Ostrava. And I see you have different hats, right? You're also co-owner and consultant at Heli Smile, right?
Heli Smile, yeah, I like Smile.
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody from Ostrava. Good morning to all cluster experts all over the Europe. I am from National Cluster Association. We call it NCA. NCA brings together near 40 members, mainly cluster organizations, technology platforms, and universities. Together with their members, our family comprise more than 1,200 innovative companies and other entities with nearly 280,000 employees. We try to define our members' needs and develop cluster policy in the Czech Republic.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you, Jiří. Let's go back then to Anna Monjo. And why don't we talk about the difference between natural clusters and cluster organizations? How is a cluster organization different from a natural cluster that forms by itself?
Yeah, well, I think that it's somehow related to one of the questions we already have, because here, well, they were asking what is first, if the egg or the chicken, no? Yeah. So we do think that the first thing you need to have in your region is a natural cluster. So it has to exist a natural value chain that is interconnected. So among this natural cluster and their natural collaborative projects that they already have, because some of them provide other parts of the value chains, then you can create the cluster organization. It doesn't make sense if you first create a cluster organization and in your region you really don't have, I don't know, maybe a biotech enterprises or a biotech environment that can support this cluster organization. Okay. So first of all, you need to have this natural cluster, analyze it, see which are their challenges, and then create this cluster organization that can, well, give some answer to these challenges and move the innovation on this area.
And you adapt the funding to each cluster. Can you give a specific example of that?
Yeah, we have the same funding for, so the same scheme, the same call for our clusters, but when they give us their projects, so when we study their projects, they are in competitive, they compete with each other. So what we analyze is the impact they have, and if they have analyzed correctly the challenges of the sector. So if they, first of all, they have to say, okay, with this project, we want to answer to this specific challenge. And then if we see that the challenge is also a challenge that we have from our public sector. So from a public point of view, and we are all aligned, we can give some grant to this project.
Okay, can you give a specific example of that? How
Yeah, for example, drought is a big problem we have had here in Spain. So we have the Catalan Water Partnership, which is a cluster that is related to water. And last year we granted a project together with them to analyze somehow the needs of the infrastructure. So different companies were going together to see if they can guarantee some continuous supply of water and quality, because sometimes these networks, these infrastructures have breakdowns or have some problems. Sure. And then they can, develop this software to try to prevent all these projects. And this is something that is interesting from a public point of view and also for the companies and for the country itself. Yeah,
so it goes beyond funding. There's that expertise also that is important information. Annie, I want to come back to you, and Annie Renders at Vlaio. So your current cluster policy of Vlaio is funding cluster organizations in strategic domains. Can you give one strategic domain?
Well, a strategic domain means that there's a knowledge base, there's knowledge institutes working on the topic, and that there's a large group of companies in that topic. So one example is the food cluster, with a lot of food companies, chocolates, all these nice things from Belgium. But we also have a lot of research facilities, because if you want them to develop the knowledge to go into the innovation, you need to build new knowledge. For example, on this food cluster, there were projects on how to increase the fiber content of foods, because it's very important for human beings to eat these fiber rich, but how can you select the type of wheat that you need? How does the handling of the wheat influences the fiber content? And doing that research at the research institutes together with the companies, they want to use more fiber-rich wheat, and when they do the research together, they can implement it in their factories, and they can increase the health of human beings, but they can also step into this more attractive food products.
Yeah. So is that what
that's important to build that knowledge and to implement it in the companies. And
so that's where the cluster facilitates that, right?
That's what the cluster facilitates, and we have this partnership for funding the cluster organization. We fund it as a government, but we fund only half. We only fund 50%. The other half is funded is private membership fees, private income from the cluster organizations. So the companies are really, they are paying a membership and they want something in return for their membership. So there's a clear interest from the industry, and that's really a key to success for a cluster organization.
Yeah, that shows it's worth it. It's profitable. What's this triple quadruple helix constellation? Industry, government, knowledge, institutions, citizens. Is that kind of
The cluster organization works together with the industry and with the knowledge institutes, but also with the government, also with, we have them working on policy priorities like the green transition, like the digital transition. As a government, this is a priority, a policy priority. And we want the cluster organizations to translate this digital transformation to food companies, to chemical companies, to logistic companies. And the cluster organizations, they are so close to their companies. They are in daily dialogue with their companies. They know the needs of these companies. So if we have as government want to implement these priorities, these policy priorities, it's the cluster organizations step in as an intermediary organization.
Right. Good. Thank you. Let's move to Michael Lieminger Liebming over at in the Styrian region of Austria. You have these Styrian clusters, strong public-private partnerships, and you're leveraging the role of some EU programs, right? Like the CHIPS Act, the Net Zero Act. How does that work? What's a specific example?
But first, let me say some sentence to what has been said from Anna and
Good.
Annie. Because it was really interesting what Anna said with the natural clusters, and that's also a thought that bothers me. You know, most of the cluster work is done on the basis of the theories of Michael Porter. And Michael Porter never talked about the cluster organization. He always talked about like natural clusters. And that's what we are doing. Basically, we are building public-private partnerships on the basis of these natural clusters. But that's a thing we are decided to do in the sense of cluster policy. And that's something very important to mention, I think.
Good.
And what you said, of course, we are building this strong public-private partnership models. I had to smile if I've heard the triple, quadruple helix. It's the same in Styria. We have this triple helix, of course.
Oh, you do too?
Yes, of course. We want to bring together public authorities, companies, and academia. So that's the basis. And what we see more and more, and I think that was your question, is that for our clusters, which are very strong in this local sense, it's getting more and more important to have in mind this big EU concepts and big EU funding schemes. You've mentioned it, European Chips Act, for example. It's very important for all over Europe, and that's a lot of money there. And we can see that there's also a big chance for our cluster organizations in the sense of development, in the sense of involvement. And what do you need for this? It's not only the strong local clusters, you also need this European meta clusters, for example.
Right.
We have in the sense of the European Chips Act, there are strong clusters in the microelectronic sector. And you see if they all start working together, you can leverage this local clusters even more. And there are big budgets there, so it's worth to have a look at this. But you need not only the local clusters, you also need the strong European meta clusters in this sense.
Great. Mikhail, thank you very much. Let's move to Yuri. And how's that working on the ground in the Czech Republic? I see you also were, for 10 years, you were director of a science park at Palacký University, which also is kind of like an incubator too. I mean, you've got that background on that. You're able to offer that expertise to as a cluster, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's tricky because I worked 10 years as a director of Science and Technology Park. I am also co-founder of, co-owner of the small software company. And now for more than 5 years, I'm struggling with clusters in the Czech Republic. So I can offer multiple and pragmatic view to cluster topic. And I'm glad that I am from Czech Republic because we are lucky country. We have continuous support for cluster organizations since 2004. But it's not due to the national cluster policy. We have no one. But it's due to operational programs from EU, which help us with co-financing our clusters in 3 main pillars: supporting cluster excellence and professionalization of cluster management. It's the most important thing, I think.
Yeah, expertise. Yeah,
expertise. Second one is support R&D projects within the clusters. Thanks to this support, for example, very well-known NanoProgress cluster from Czech Republic finance years of research and development of unique technology for production of nanofiber structures using alternative voltage. Right. And the result was that development of more than 10 globally unique nanofiber production facilities and the creation of dozen products using nanofiber structures and composites were developed. And the last pillar is supporting subsidies for cluster R&D infrastructure themselves. So I think we have very clever policy how to support clusters because we still keep remind ourselves what is the most important thing to increase turnover, increase profits, and send more invoices to their
There you go.
companies customers. So this is these are the steps how to do it well.
Okay, very good. Let me go to some couple of questions. Frederick Lux asking, how do you take into account, as we had just recently discussed, the chicken and egg situation? Is it strong economic activity that triggers the clusters, or is it clusters that's trigger the economic activity? I don't know, Anna, maybe you kind of mentioned that yourself.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate on that? I mean, obviously, Catalonia is an economic powerhouse, but you do need clusters to make it turn, don't you?
Yes, in fact, we do. And well, as Michael was saying before, there are clusters that have been created, or cluster organizations that were creating on their own. Or oldest cluster is 27 years, also not as old as yours, but they were created not from the public point of view, but a group of enterprises that decided to create that cluster. But there are natural clusters that never develop a cluster organization. So in this situation, for example, 2 years ago, we launched the waste cluster here in Catalonia. So what we did first is to analyze this natural cluster we already had in Catalonia around waste treatment. And what we do is to analyze, to study how many companies do we have, which are the challenges they have, what is the international situation of this sector, in this case, if the waste manager, which are the regulations. So we structure a kind of a study from our natural cluster. And from here, we launch the cluster organization, starting to put all the companies in collaboration, in network, and to start to develop some activities.
Yeah, and what's I think we had discussed about a nuclear example also, about building a cluster around nuclear plants.
Well, in fact, it's not exactly that, but we have here in Catalonia the situation that we have 2 nuclear power plants in the south that are in the next years they have to close because they are getting old. And we have decided to develop some grants for our clusters, so the clusters that we already have, to develop some projects in this area of Catalonia just right now, just to be there before the economical situation comes, because some of this area, the economical the companies are related to the power plants, to the nuclear power plants. So now we have started to create new projects in this area through our clusters to develop a new businesses, or to develop the business that they're already there. So we can anticipate the closing of the nuclear power plants.
Right. Other sources of energy and other economic activity to make sure that the jobs in the nuclear industry there are.
So to make sure that the solution is there before the problem.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Let me go to another question. Do you have, this is from Jepper Falk. Do you have an overview of the split between private and public funding to the clusters and its development? Maybe just give me one example, Annie, if you can, the split between private and public, what's more important? How does that work?
Well, we work in Flanders on this Article 27, where it's at 50%. So it's half public funding, half private funding, at least half private funding, because when they grow in members, when they get more interest from the members, a lot of our cluster organizations have even more than 50% from the private, but we still find it very important to have this small amount, well, small for some, very important, depending on the cluster organization, but to have this public funding, we feel it's important because we want to connect, we want to keep the partnership from the government to these cluster organizations, to have them working on policy priorities, as I said earlier. but it's the basis is 50%, at least 50% private funding.
Okay, good. Anybody else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I can give an example from Styria.
Okay.
It's pretty easy in our case.
Easy.
It's 1/3 public funding, 1/3 private fees, and 1/3 is projects, EU projects, local project funding in general. So that's the situation in my feeling, because it's also in the question the project funding, and as I mentioned before, even then with large projects from European Chips Act, Net Zero Act, and so it's rising. But yeah, that's the basis. Annie stated it perfectly.
Yeah. Jiri, you had something to add, I think, right?
Yeah, maybe maybe for the first years of cluster development, public funding is very, very important, and also for specific projects. For example, when you would like to move or rebuild some sector structure in some specific field, you need a very huge public funding. But in my opinion, when the cluster offers standard cluster services, the co-financing is very, very important, because it's proof of the quality of these services. So
Right.
I think at least 50, maybe more % of this cost should be from the co-finance, from membership fees and other sources, but not from public.
Right. Well, I guess the intent is eventually to be able to fly on your own, right? You want to eventually get there, if that's possible.
I'm not so sure about that, but
yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, because we had that discussion before, is that there sometimes it's not just business, it's also societal things. And that's what Frederik Lucke came up with another question. How do you see the value of clusters in order to solve societal challenges? How should this be a goal, and does the goal need to remain, let's see, should this be a goal, or does the goal need to be purely economic? There are societal reasons for clusters to exist, right?
Yeah, I think from our point of view, there are lots of social issues that cannot be solved only by public policies. So the enterprises, the companies, they need to put their efforts also not only in the economical growth of their companies, but also on the impact they are generating. So we have developed also a program from our cluster policy to help our clusters to see which are the challenges they have at social level or at green level, and start to take action on that. So all the projects they present to our calls, they need to have a positive impact, of course.
Right. Another question from Maria Pereligina. Let's say we have a natural cluster, like you were talking about, Anna. What would be the next step? How do you take it beyond the natural cluster to an actual European cluster?
I will answer, because we have done it. It was the example I took before for the waste cluster. We first analyze and then we take action. So first of all, we take action from the public point of view, and then we try. We tell the companies to create the cluster organization from then.
Right. Anybody else want to?
Yeah, I think when you have this natural cluster, meaning you have companies on the same industry or in a value chain close to each other, to have this develop to a cluster, or to be, if they need a cluster organization, there must be the need for the companies to collaborate with research institutes, to collaborate with each other, to share values. If there's not that sense of cooperation, collaboration, it does not make really sense to have a cluster organization either, because the matchmaking is so important. And if there is not this sense of cooperation within the industry, then it's you should not try to take this next step.
Yeah, right.
Maybe I would like to try to
Go ahead, Mika.
combine the last two questions. So in our opinion, it's very important as first step to get in the big industry players. And the first thing you have to do then is you have to find some common ground. I mean, clusters in our view are not just service organizations, they serve a higher purpose, so to say. So you have to get in all the microelectronic big fishes and say you have to find out, is there a common ground? And for example, they all need workers, they all need visibility, and you can find these things. And if you have these things, you can build on that. But that's why I was laughing before. I don't believe that it's a good idea to have it only private financed, because then some things are not working anymore. Annie stated it before, the connection to public authorities, to public policies. And last but not least, also the big challenges that we are facing, environmental challenges, for example, digitalization. And there are some big goals you have to work for. Not only as a company, it's more than just a company.
So it's more than, it's not, it's not just a governmental role, but it's a governmental responsibility, actually.
Yes,
So
yes.
I want to mention something that, Michael, of what you're doing. You have the Spitzenleistung program. We've heard of Spitzenkandidaten. What is Spitzenleistung? How does that work?
So we had it before. It's a nice cascade funding scheme, actually. Cascade funding, it's also a very important field for us. So Jan Philip explained it before. You basically give a budget to an intermediary, and that's the cluster organization in this sense. And they directly give this budget to their members. And
is
we
that
are doing.
Is that the Bridge? Is one example the Bridge SMEs project?
Yeah, Bridge SME is another example for that. Spitzenleistung, it's an example for that. But it's always a cascade funding scheme. So we basically make the clusters a funding organization. Normally, I know we are the local business development agency, so normally we give the funding. In this case, we give the funding to the cluster organizations, and the cluster organizations, they're doing projects in specific fields. They're bridging gaps between smaller and larger companies. They are tackling challenges like digitalization, green transformation, and so on. And they can give from their budgets, smaller budgets, directly to the companies. And I think that's a very nice thing, because nobody then will ask, what do we need a cluster organization for? Because directly gets the money. And in some sense, they take out the complexity for the SMEs for these funding schemes, because clusters in this setup, they're doing a lot of work in the sense of bureaucracy, complexity, and they take this out for the companies. And so, in my opinion, it's a win-win-win situation. We get out the money, the clusters have a nice position, and the companies are directly getting the money for projects in the right direction.
Okay. Anybody else want to add? Yes, Yuri, please.
Yeah, maybe I explain better my point of view for funding. I totally agree with you, Michael. I think that the role of clusters is to support the region, develop the sectors or industry we are working on, and support the members. The third thing, I'm truly, I think that co-financing is very necessary. But in the first and second, support a region and develop some industry or sector. In these two pillars, the public funding is very important. For example, Moravian and Silesian region, when I'm now, has been a heavy industry in past years, and now undergoing a transformation. And one of the priority is to promote hydrogen as energy for the future. The Moravian and Silesian region is intensively support hydrogen cluster to create a hydrogen strategy. And after that, hydrogen cluster will try to bring this strategy to life. I think this is the specific example that public funding must play 100% percent rule, because this is something that nobody will pay in from the private money, from the private pocket.
Yeah, good point. Good point.
We need to differentiate.
Yeah,
I think.
I need to wrap this up soon because we have we want to get to the funding opportunities. But there's one thing from you, Annie, that a point that you made about that you intend to make about the future of cluster initiatives. There's a green paper that the Flemish government is it writing now, or is it done, about the future of cluster policy? What can we expect from that?
We are close to this 10-year funding as written in Article 27 of the GBER, the European regulation. So the government asked us how to continue with these cluster organizations, because we have written this green paper for our minister, and well, as you know, or maybe you don't, but we have had elections, so we will soon have a new government. And so to prepare the new government, we have written this green paper where we had the results, the analysis of what the clusters did, their impact, and then we have some suggestions to continue, and then we explain this market failure on collaboration and on working on societal challenges, and bring in SMEs to work with large companies, and bring in SMEs to work with research institutes. So we want to have a kind of continuation of this support. But well, as the European regulations are what the European regulations are, so we have to we will go in interaction with DG Grow soon as well, because also we hear that from several regions that this 10-year is coming up, and how to continue, especially with this societal challenges, which are so important for Flanders, for Belgium, but also on a European level. So we are really looking for a way to continue the support.
I think that kind of begs Jan Philip. Can you want to give a final comment on that? Are you there, Jan?
Of course, I'm still there. Yeah, we hear that very, very regularly, and it's clear from all of the discussion that we need a better differentiation of what clusters are meant to do. And I can only agree to what Annie has said. There are many big questions. And one thing that I would add is clusters do generate public goods. And what I mean with that is that this is something that cannot be commercialized. And this public good translates into value for our economies, our societies, and so on. So we cannot treat them as a pure economic entity. And I don't see any conflict with competition law in the EU when it comes to that. So I think we need a solution there. I agree.
So
personal opinion.
So stay tuned. Jan Philip, thank you so much. Also to Anna, Annie, Michael, Yiri. Great talk, and great talking with the audience about this. Great questions. Thank you so much. And time is ticking, so let us move on to the funding opportunities. Angela, please.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you all for this interesting debate. Speaking about funding, we have brought here some interesting funding. You have here the first call. It's an action grant budget based, and the title is Experimentation and Exchange of Good Practices for Value Creation. Projects are expected to contribute for the following outcome. That means value creation and transfer to the economy and society, new solutions to societal and economic challenges, and improvement of structures, strategies, and practices and skills for knowledge valorization. Themes that were mentioned today. Deadline would be 25 of September. You have all the information, as always, published on the EU funding and tenders portal. We have this other opportunity of accelerating uptake through open proposal for advanced SME innovations. Projects are expected to contribute to the development of a mature technological solution addressing EU security policy priorities in the areas addressed by the Cluster 3 work program: facilitated access to civil security market, improved cooperation between public buyers and small supply market actors, and stronger partnerships between small and medium EU security, industry, and technology actors. This deadline is for the 20th of November. Also, you have the opportunity to work in Teaming for Excellence. Projects are expected to increase scientific compatibilities of the coordinating institution and the host country, enabling the coordinator and the potential entities to successfully apply for competitive funding, improve the R&I culture through centers of excellence, stimulus for institutional and systemic reforms, strengthened and mutually benefiting collaboration with partners, research and innovation capacities, contribution to achievement of the specific objectives, enhance innovations, and integration. The planned opening for this call is 3rd December. Deadlines are 10th April 25 and 20 January 26. Also, you can have call lump sum grant this time, support to the activities of the set plan key action area, renewable fuels and bioenergy. The expected outcome would be engagement of stakeholders because it's pivotal, the transition in a clean energy systems, and the projects are expected to contribute to consolidation of strong and sustainable networks and cooperation among ETIPs or similar stakeholders. Planned opening date is 17th September, and the deadline for this call would be 4th February 2025, and we will finish with the opportunities for our SMEs. Don't forget that there are some open calls for Euroclusters. We have the French CCI for digitalization, greening, and internationalization. We have Gemstone, Ingenious. We have the Resist program, coaching and mentoring for feasibility services. Also the Sustain, which is on the second call, the Recenter, the Xbuild, and the Sileo, for example. You can find all the calls on the cluster collaboration platform as always. Thank you.
Great. Angela, thank you so much. That's a lot of information, very important. If you feel like you got whiplash trying to read it all, you can still look at the cluster collaboration platform, and all of the slides are on there. Look, register for the next talks on the 18th of September, Impact Insights, Measuring and Optimizing Cluster Performance. I like the comment from Nico saying, thank you, everybody, and let's continue the interactions. How do I do that? Well, you can continue the discussion online in the LinkedIn discussion group. And yeah, there's also a deadline until 6 September for the next talks. That's important as well. So there's that discussion group you can go to. Back up, show that, back up. Yeah, that's it. That's what I'm talking about. On LinkedIn, you can continue that discussion as Nico was calling for. I think that does it. Make sure you register for the cluster talks, register for the cluster collaboration platform. And the hashtag EU Clusters Talks, very important. Thanks for being with us. I'm Chris Burns. See you next time.